The Spire at Oakhaven had been climbing for 30 years. It was the tallest structure in the valley, perhaps in the country. The builder could not be certain of this, but he did not need to be. He had stopped comparing it to other things long ago. He climbed the scaffolding each morning before the laborers arrived, and at the top, the crown waited. Cedar and copper interlocked in a pattern he had been refining since spring. He had recalculated the joinery 4 times. Each iteration was an improvement on the last. He knew this because he had checked, and the numbers agreed with him. The Spire had been speaking for some weeks. Not loudly, just a low shudder felt through the boots rather than heard. The kind of movement that a man could attribute to wind, or to the settling that all structures do when the season turns. A young mason, barely 20, noticed this. He was clearing frost-loosened earth from the base when he called up. The builder descended and followed the young man to the north face, where the earth had pulled back slightly from the foundation stone. The young mason pointed at it the way a man points at something mildly curious, and the builder looked at it the way a man looks at something he has seen before. A crack ran the full width of the cornerstone, black, precise, not new. He knew when it had appeared. He knew exactly. It had been there in his 2nd year, a faint line he had seen by lamplight and catalogued as surface weathering. He had laid the next course of stone the following morning and never looked at it again. He crouched down. His knees settled into the mud. He placed his palm flat against the stone, and through his hand he felt the full weight of it. 30 years of oak and iron and copper, all of it pressing down through this one point. The shudder was not the wind. He could feel that now. It came from below and moved upward, through every floor, through every joint he had perfected, through the crown he had not yet finished. He stayed crouched for a long time before he stood. He did not look up at the crown. He walked to the rope pulley at the base and began to work it. The first thing he lowered was the brass level, then the set of silver-tipped chisels he had brought up that morning, then the cedar stock he had shaped for the final tier. The laborers stopped working and watched him. No one spoke, and he did not explain. He just kept his hands on the rope and worked it steadily, lowering everything he had carried up, one piece at a time, down to the dirt. He lowered his tools to the dirt, not because the structure had fallen, but because he put his hand against the stone and felt what he had been refusing to feel for 30 years. Most men never reach that moment, not because the crack isn't there, but because they never crouch down. There is a logic to building upward. Every floor added is evidence of skill, of persistence, of a man who knows his trade. The work above the floor does not look like avoidance. It looks like progress, and after long enough, the man doing it cannot tell the difference. A man finds something wrong early, before anyone is watching. The cost of addressing it is not in materials. It is in the admission that the first stone was laid badly. So he covers it, adds weight above it, makes the upper floors precise enough that the question of the base stops being asked. He does not decide this once. He decides it every morning he climbs past it. Each season the spire grew, and each season the crack held its position beneath it. The distance between the crown and the cornerstone became its own argument for leaving things alone. Most men think the hard thing is admitting they were wrong. It isn't. The hard thing is what comes after. The work that follows the admission is not learning. It is removing, going back down, taking apart work that is genuinely good in order to reach something underneath it that is not. That is what stops men. Not the shame of the original error, but the cost of undoing what was built on top of it. The builder's crown was real, the joinery precise, the finest work of his life. He lowered it to the dirt anyway, because the quality of what sat above the crack did not change what the crack was doing beneath it. This is what most men's accounting leaves out. New information placed on a false foundation does not become true. It becomes heavier. Every accurate thing a man builds onto a wrong assumption adds load to the problem. The structure gets taller and the crack widens until the shudder comes up through the soles of his boots and he can no longer attribute it to the wind. A man who removes a false thing has not lost what was real. He has lost the weight of it, and what remains is smaller, solid, and something that does not shudder. The builder stood up from the mud and walked to the rope and did not go back to the crown.